At 2:28 in the morning on February 1st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker suddenly went completely silent. Exactly 2 minutes later, a camera on a quiet back road caught a car speeding away into the darkness, using the one route that almost no one outside the neighborhood would even know about. Something about that just doesn't sit right with me. 2 minutes, one little device that had been faithfully watching over her heart. And then, nothing. One car vanishing down a road that feels almost hidden on purpose. If this was supposed to be a random crime, why did everything line up so perfectly? Stick with me, because this story only gets stranger the deeper we go. Nancy wasn't just a name in the news. She was a real grandmother, 84 years old, living in that peaceful part of Catalina foothills in Tucson where neighbors still wave to each other and folks feel safe enough to leave their windows open on warm nights. The kind of place where life moves gently, morning coffee on the porch, Sunday dinners with family, the simple comfort of knowing your home is your sanctuary. But on that February night, that sense of safety was shattered in just 16 minutes. At 2:01, her doorbell camera caught a hooded figure standing right on her porch, armed, wearing gloves, carrying a backpack. 27 minutes later, at 2:28, her pacemaker stopped sending any signal to her phone. And at 2:30, that car was seen racing down Camino Real, the one back road locals say you only find if you already know the area like the back of your hand. Here's what keeps bothering me. Weeks before that night, neighbors had already started noticing odd things around her house. From January 11th onward, cameras picked up people lingering, watching. One man showed up with a backpack and what looked like a communication device, like he was talking to someone else. Another time, a figure just stood there quietly, not in a hurry, just observing. There was also a young man walking by who didn't move, like someone out for a casual jog. Cap pulled low, pace all wrong for the neighborhood. And then there was the man with the neat beard, smoking beside a dark red truck parked at the corner for 3 full days after Nancy vanished, before it simply disappeared. None of it feels like coincidence. It feels like someone took the time to learn the quiet rhythms of her street. Which corners had eyes on them, and which ones stayed dark. This is where things start to feel off for me, because if you're planning something this careful, you don't usually pick the most obvious way out unless you have a very good reason, or unless you know the neighborhood better than most people who live there. What happened next was unexpected. The couple who owned that camera on Camino Real waited patiently. They waited 1 week, then 2, then nearly a month, hoping the authorities would come knock on their door and ask for the footage. No one ever did. So eventually, they reached out themselves and shared the video with the press. That one clip has been talked about by so many of us ever since. But even with all those eyes on it, the official response felt awfully short. They called it a dead end. Yet something about that answer doesn't sit easy. Dismissing those 12 vehicles doesn't erase the road itself. It doesn't erase the fact that someone knew exactly how to slip away in the middle of the night using a route that feels almost invisible. And it definitely doesn't explain why another man was later seen circling Nancy's house 50 to 100 times, with her photo saved right there on his phone. The sheriff said he wasn't connected. But behaviors like that, they don't usually happen by accident. They speak of obsession. They speak of someone who just couldn't stay away. And that brings us to the part of this story that keeps pulling at my heart. While the neighborhood was still trying to make sense of it all, the FBI made a very deliberate decision. They put one man, Tomas Occhioni, under intense physical surveillance for 21 straight days. Not just checking his phone or bank records from an office. Real teams on the ground, rotating shifts, making sure no single face would stand out. Different cars every time. Quiet communication. Their only job was to watch and carefully document every single place he went, what time he arrived, how long he stayed, and what his movements looked like. The pattern that emerged wasn't scattered or random like someone living an ordinary life. He kept returning to the same secondary location again and again, with an almost ritual-like consistency. It wasn't his home. It wasn't his workplace. It was a quiet spot that barely showed up in any public records, the kind of place that would slip right past a normal background check. That detail changes everything, because when you're already on the radar for something this serious, most people would change their habits immediately. They'd stay away. They'd try to look normal. But he kept going back. Two possibilities come to mind, and both leave me with a heavy feeling. The first is that he never even noticed the surveillance. In that case, everything the agents recorded was his real, unguarded behavior. No acting, no performance. That kind of pure evidence would be incredibly powerful. But here's the problem with that idea. The second possibility feels even heavier. What if he did notice he was being watched and still couldn't stop returning? That would mean whatever was waiting in that location pulled on him stronger than the fear of federal agents following his every move. That kind of pull doesn't come from something ordinary like old boxes or forgotten papers. It suggests something that needed real, constant attention, something that could spoil or be discovered if left alone too long. And that changes the whole picture. The FBI didn't rush in on the first day. They waited. They watched. They let that pattern build for 3 full weeks, creating a timeline so detailed that any judge would clearly see knowledge, control, and intent. Why wait that long if evidence might be lost or damaged? That question has stayed with me. Maybe they knew the pattern itself would tell a much stronger story than one quick search. Or maybe something small shifted during one of those later visits. Something the agents noticed from the shadows that told them the time had finally come. Either way, when they decided to move in, they didn't handle it alone. The moment they crossed that threshold, they called for reinforcements right away, not because they ran into armed resistance. These kinds of evidence recoveries aren't shootouts. They called because what they found inside was bigger and more overwhelming than the first team could properly document, preserve, and handle on their own. They needed specialists, the kind whose training matches exactly what was waiting behind that door. Forensic anthropologists, pathologists, technicians experienced with complex biological evidence. A well-prepared federal team doesn't make that call unless the scene exceeded everything they had expected. That single request for help tells us so much. It suggests the discovery wasn't just static evidence sitting there. It suggests something that had required ongoing care, something that needed a human presence at regular intervals, exactly the way Occhioni had been showing up. Now, pause with me for a moment and think about that behavior. A man under active federal surveillance, still driving back day after day to a hidden location that seemed to demand his physical presence. What kind of secret creates a pull so strong that even the risk of being watched couldn't break it? It feels almost like maintenance of something still fragile, still in need of attention, the kind of responsibility that doesn't let a person simply walk away. And right now, any connection between that place and the tunnel found under Nancy's own property remains unconfirmed, but it's becoming harder and harder to ignore, because that tunnel already spoke of serious planning, resources, and coordination far beyond one person acting alone in a moment of panic. If Occhioni's secret location is another piece of the same chain, then we're no longer looking at a lone, masked figure on a porch. We're looking at something more structured, something colder and more organized than most of us want to imagine. But something did not feel right about the simple lone intruder story from the very beginning. The careful reconnaissance, the hidden tunnel, the obsessive returns, and the immediate call for high-level forensic help. Each piece on its own could maybe be explained away. Put them together, and the picture keeps growing larger and darker. And through all of it, Nancy still hasn't come home. No official link has been made public between that hidden location and the events of that February night. But the behaviors keep pointing in one quiet, uncomfortable direction, a direction many of us hope isn't true. I keep thinking about what it must feel like to be pulled back to the same spot day after day, even when you know eyes are watching you. That isn't the action of someone who is finished with something. That feels like the action of someone who still carries a heavy responsibility for it. And that responsibility may hold the key to understanding where Nancy is right now. What do you think really happened here? The more we sit with these details, the more the official timeline seems to bend under the weight of human behavior that just doesn't add up. Notebook V thanks you for watching. I truly appreciate every one of you who stayed until the end and let these details sit with your heart. It means a lot that you care enough to think deeply about stories like this, especially when they involve someone's mother, someone's grandmother. Which part of this case feels the most off to you right now? The perfectly timed 2-minute window, or the 21 days of returns that even the FBI found impossible to ignore? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one, and the most thoughtful thoughts always help us see things from new angles. We'll keep following this together.